NordVPN is becoming more than just a VPN. Threat protection will guard your device against malicious websites, malware, trackers, and intrusive ads, even if you're not connected to a VPN server at the time. Step up your cybersecurity and stay safe.
The world has failed, I tell you. The world has failed yet again.
This is an extract of a much longer conversation between Tom Luongo and Merocuris and Alex Christoforou of The Duran. I shall link to the whole video in the description below, and you can find it on any of the Duran channels. Enjoy.
Absolutely, it's a brilliant article that Tom has written on his own website, which I think we need to mention and talk about. It's about Europe. It is about what is going on in Europe now, and it's not just Europe and the attempt of some people to construct Europe, but it is also about the pressures that this project is coming under, pressures that Tom has been talking about for a long time, ever since the Fed started to raise interest rates in the United States, and part of the agendas that the Fed is pursuing. And we're starting to see the effect of this, and the fact that this is having, the crushing effect that this is having on the people who are running the EU project and the financial institutions which underpin the EU project, and the very, very troubling and sinister, and dare I say it, straightforwardly illegal moves that they're planning to take in order to address these various problems. So it's all about Eurobonds, but that's only, part of the story. I think the first thing to do is to go over to you, Tom, and perhaps you can explain the points that you were making in that article.
The biggest problem for the EU has been something that Martin Armstrong had to educate me on 10 years ago, which is that the euro is a currency of contrivance because they don't have any form of integrated tax and spend authority. They have 20 member central banks issuing euros based on different debt profile, different debt validity profiles. Like you've got people like Greece and Italy and Germany in the same union, and they're issuing debt at different rates and different different risk profiles and all the rest of it. And so the European Union has been able to construct itself as a political union assiduously, almost like these people are running Microsoft project as a Gantt chart. Like, we're going to do this on this date, we're going to do this here, we're going to do that there. But the fiscal integration that is necessary to make the political integration that they've achieved stick has to come in the form of giving centralized tax and spend authority to the European Commission. Now, Alex, you and I talked about this years ago during COVID when they issued the Eurobonds. So that's why I brought it up in the article. I brought it up back in an article I wrote back in on Halloween, actually, when Lagarde was out there, ECB President Christine Lagarde was out there screaming that, hey, it's time that we create an index for these Eurobonds to up their profile so we can get investors to buy into them. Well, yeah, but they were trading at 55 cents on the dollar at that point. And that's when I went into that whole thing, and I educated myself on where that was. I remember the beginning of the story. Hey, let's get the camel's nose under the tent to start giving the EC, the European Commission, tax and spend authority. But okay, so what's the project actually look like? And of course, it looks like the typical created market, which is that there is no market for these things. They shook down the member central banks to buy $200 billion of these Eurobonds, and now they're sitting on 45 and 50% losses on them. But they still want to keep going forward. So now they're using the war in Ukraine as the means by which to do the next tranche. And they put it in, of course, the mouth of the highly Russophobic and highly, WEF adjacent Kaja Kallas of Estonia to say, we need war bonds to pay for the reindustrialization of Europe and the remilitarization of Europe to fight the boogeyman of Putin. Putin is clearly nothing more than a political thing for the Europeans. I do not believe that that's the case for the Anglo sphere, for the British and American neoconservatives who see the Russians in a fundamentally different light. So there's that tension, right? And that tension exists within NATO. But the goal here, as always, has been, if you think about the overarching plan, has always been to morph NATO and the European Union and the American empire and roll it all up into the UN. It's always been the goal. I don't think it's a good goal. I don't think it's an achievable goal, but that's the project. That's the Gantt chart, right? And all the people who put this thing together are dead now, right? So Jacob Rothschild was one of them, and he died on Monday, right? And Kissinger's gone, and Brzezinski is gone, and they're all gone, right? So now you just have the flying monkeys running around, the project managers running around doing this thing and trying to shoehorn this into the future, and they can't get it done because they're standing back and they could do it, or they could have a better chance of doing it had the world been able to stay at 0% interest rates. And they were selling the idea that we had to stay at 0% interest rates because of climate change. So they were selling us on climate change and cars and electric cars and all this stuff. And Lagarde's out there saying, we need to spend trillions and trillions. And the only way we're going to spend trillions on this is, of course, to stay at the zero bound in order to make this affordable. And then there's the Fed going, yeah, that's nice. No, 5.5%. You get to do this at 5.5%. You don't get to do it at 0%. And of course, at 5.5%, the whole project is completely uneconomic. And now we're starting to see the cracks in this. But they keep pushing forward because they don't have any other options, guys. What else are they going to do? Admit defeat? This is the European Union. They don't admit defeat. They just double down. No. And people that vampires don't cast reflections in a mirror. That's who these people are. So that's the core of the arguments, the core of what I was talking about. And and we can get into the other implications on this, which is of course why NATO is so important to them, because NATO is part of the longer term plan to push this whole project forward, to turn NATO into the global police force for global government. That's their idea. And it's a dumb idea, and I'm never advocating for it, and two, I'm not even advocating that they can pull it off, because there are too many other forces around the world going, yeah, we don't want that, and all they really have to do is just sit back and say no, and you let the Fed raise interest rates, and the Russians and OPEC, or now BROPEC with Brazil, keeps oil prices above $80 a barrel, and and they're just getting drained of all their collateral, and it's just all going to collapse, and that's where I think we're closer to that than we've ever been before.
Now let's get thanks for all of that. Now let's get to this question of Eurobonds, because it goes directly to what you were saying about the artificial nature of this entire structure. Because if you're going to be a borrower and you go to a lender and you ask to borrow money, a responsible lender is going to ask you the very first question: what is your cash income? What is the cash flow that is coming to you? Now, if you are the EU, the answer straightforwardly is you don't have one, because you're not drawing directly through taxes from the people that you are governing, because you're not a state, you've got no consent, you've got none of these things. You are entirely dependent on funding that you are getting from the various states that make up the EU. So that is the problem, as I see it, that you have. And that's the underlying problem with the whole Eurobond idea. It's also the whole problem with the whole EU structure. Because if you're talking about a currency, what makes a currency strong? What makes a currency, in fact, ultimately a proper currency? It is that it is the expression of the economy, the material wealth, the structure of a country produced by the state, which governs that country through the institutions of that state. And of course, again, the EU isn't a state, never has been. So you have a currency which functions in a completely different way from every other currency, because it is not underpinned by a Treasury Department, a economic policy. There isn't a proper, at least no disclosed economic policy, nor can there be. There is none of that. And that, again, points to the artificial nature of the whole structure. So am I correct in saying, Tom, that one of the points you're making essentially is this: you can do all of these things. You can issue Eurobonds. You can issue, you can run single currencies like the euro. But of course, what you can't afford to have is costs. You can't have costs because as you have no secure money flow, you can't operate it. You haven't got the structure that supports an economy, and
Well,
you don't have the cash with which you can pay back your loans.
what it comes down to, Alex, is you're right. It's about the risk profile of the bonds that you're issuing. So I'm going to give you a perfect example of. So the EU is trying to turn itself into a government, right? A pan-European government. It needs to be able to sell these bonds to investors. It needs to have the cash flow. It needs to be able to have provable cash flow and provable